Welcome back to another episode of Podcast on the Brink. Indiana 79, Purdue 74, the final on Saturday in Bloomington at Assembly Hall. To help us recap the big win for Indiana and also look ahead to Tuesday's matchup against Rutgers, which will also be played in Bloomington, Tyler Tachman of the Indianapolis Star is back on Podcast on the Brink. How you doing on this Sunday afternoon, Tyler?
I'm doing well, and I want the record to show that the first time we tried recording this, you said inside the halls, Tyler Tachman, and I wanted to keep rolling with it, but you said start over. But I have to throw that in there. But anyways, I did used to work for Inside the Hall, so it's fine. But anyways, I'm doing very well. I hope you're doing well too.
So, Indiana entering yesterday's game, I think it was either an even line or Purdue a slight favorite going into the game, but it kind of felt like a game that Indiana would have to play nearly perfect to win. I said that in our community on Inside the Hall before the game that I felt like Indiana would have to be nearly flawless to win. I don't necessarily think they met that bar, but they were helped tremendously by Purdue's turnovers and a first half where they scored 50 points, arguably their best offensive half of basketball of the entire season. Just how surprised were you, Tyler, that I guess A, Indiana won the game, and B, how it basically controlled the game throughout. They led for over 39 minutes. I think Purdue led for a total of 35 seconds in the game. It was, basically a wire-to-wire win. And although it did get dicey there at points in the second half, it was a game that Indiana basically controlled for most of the afternoon.
Yeah, that first half was just really dominant. I think what was encouraging was just how the level of intensity that Indiana came out with. That, this was the type of game that would be inexcusable to come out flat, to not come out with energy, just given the atmosphere, given the hype of the game. And I think Indiana, just the energy they brought on both ends of the floor, the intensity they brought on both ends of the floor. And then defensively, I mean, they in that first half, I thought they did a good job of limiting Edey. You're not going to probably stop him fully, but it felt like some of those turnovers, maybe some of them were self-inflicted by Purdue, but also Indiana just seemed like it was keeping Purdue off balance with the looks that they were giving. They were getting Zach Edey a little uncomfortable, and just the cushion that they were able to build in that first half ended up being really important, just given the kind of waves of runs that Purdue went in the second half. But another thing is that Indiana could have, there was multiple times in the second half where, okay, you go into the break on runs. It would be easy for Indiana to kind of roll over and say, okay, well, we had our run, and now Purdue is looking like the number one team in the nation. It would be easy to let them kind of take over the game, and Indiana didn't. There were a few times where Purdue got really close and scored to, cutting their deficit down. But Indiana continually, especially down the stretch of the game, they made meaningful plays to win the game, and I think that's so much of what, you look at Indiana basketball the last few seasons, that Indiana hasn't been able to make those plays. But they were against Purdue. You look at Race Thompson hitting 2 big free throws. You look at Jalen Hood-Schifino with a tough drive. You look at Trey Galloway making 2 clutch free throws. Overall, Indiana made those plays that have kind of been elusive to it. And in a game against a team of the caliber of Purdue, those are the plays that you need to make, and Indiana did.
Yeah, I thought going into the game, one area where Purdue seemed a little bit vulnerable on the road in an atmosphere like this was the 2 freshman guards. Obviously, Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith have been really good this year. You don't start the season 22-1 without really good guard play in a league like the Big Ten, and those two have been terrific. But you look at the final numbers, Braden Smith, 4 points. He's 1 of 8 from the field. Lawyer scores 12, but he needs 12 shots to get there. He's 4 of 12 from the field. Didn't really play particularly well in the first half. I thought Trey Galloway had a lot to do with that. Were you surprised at just how Indiana was maybe able to take advantage of those guys, particularly early in the game, and maybe take them out of the game and get them out of their comfort zone? And also, just a bigger picture question that I'm kind of wondering about Purdue as we kind of head towards the stretch run of the season and ultimately the NCAA tournament. Um, do you think Purdue is, a threat to really make a deep run, having two freshman guards like that are relatively unproven in the tournament? And how big of a problem do you foresee that being for them maybe when it gets to the single elimination format of the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I think when you look at March, one of the big things you want to have is experienced guards, guys that are bringing the ball up the floor, that can kind of run the offense, that can control the offense. Purdue with those two freshmen doesn't have that experience. I think, to me, the kind of biggest question mark is, look, Zach Edey had 33 and 18 on Saturday. Purdue still loses. I know Edey is an absolute monster inside, but like, we've seen basically how Purdue is able to have this pick your poison, where you either put all your chips in and trying to guard Edey and try to let other guys beat you on the perimeter, or you take your chances with Edey. And for me, the biggest question is, are the guys around Edey going to be good enough to win to continue to win and win in March? Because if you have a game like this in March where Braden Smith goes 1 for 8, Fletcher Loyer goes 4 for 12, like that's just not a good recipe to win. And relying on two kids that are really good but just haven't played at that level of college basketball in March, to me, raises some concerns. But Purdue has been really good this season. Those two have been played but mature beyond their years. But to me, what stood out on Indiana's side of things is just how much of and I know Mike Woodson says a phrase sort of like this often, that it was a full team effort. But I really think that this was, everyone that got playing time on Saturday scored. It felt like everyone that played contributed. And I think it's kind of overlooked the fact that, because we've just gotten maybe almost like desensitized to Indiana dealing with injuries, that Jordan Geronimo and Xavier Johnson didn't play. So Indiana's starting point guard and a key guy that has made spot starts and come off the bench this season didn't even play, and Indiana still wins. But you look at a guy like Caleb Banks, who a few weeks ago isn't even in Indiana's regular rotation. If you would have told me he's going to make a maybe not massive but a meaningful impact in this game, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But he has 4 points, 3 rebounds. Malik Renew, his growth, he has really been up and down from where you probably expected him to be at the beginning of the season. But he has 8 points, 4 rebounds. His growth has been an encouraging sign. Tamar Bates, he wasn't great, but he has 3 points off the bench. Miller Kopp has 6. Race Thompson has 6. Galloway, I thought, was really good, has 11. And so basically you have Trace Jackson Davis, who's a star, 25.7 rebounds. But then you have a collection of guys around him that are doing their jobs, whether that be scoring 1 bucket, whether that be getting multiple, Jalen Hood-Schifino, what he was able to do. To me, it feels like Indiana is getting closer to that complete team of just guys doing what they need to do to win, and maybe not feeling like, hey, I need to drop 20 or whatever, but just filling the role needed to get the job done. And I think that Indiana did that against Purdue.
Yeah, Banks has been really impressive. You mentioned 3 rebounds. The key there is all 3 of those rebounds were offensive. I mean, there was a couple of plays where he basically just out-hustled Purdue to get the ball and give Indiana second life on a possession. And those are the little plays in a game that's as close as it was down the stretch, and ultimately you have to make. And so, you mentioned all the scoring contributions. I think 8 guys played in the first half. All 8 played. It was a true team effort. It wasn't just that Trace Jackson Davis had 18 points, is that the contributions were coming from everywhere. Going into the game, the 2 areas that Indiana really had to be concerned about were the rebounding, obviously, in the free throw line. I felt like they had to at least win one of those to give themselves a chance to win. Obviously, Purdue does a much better job overall on the glass. I think they out-rebounded Indiana by 16. They had a ton of offensive rebounds. At times, it really hurt Indiana. But the free throw line is where Indiana, surprisingly, had an advantage. They outscored Purdue by 5 at the line. That's ultimately the final margin of the game. And I just felt like Indiana earned that because they were at times the more aggressive team, and they you looked at the fact that Purdue was out. I think had an average of 10.5 more attempts from the free throw line than its opponents entering the game. That's a lot, a big deficit to overcome. I thought that was pretty monumental in Indiana being able to pull off the win on Saturday.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at Trace Jackson Davis, he's 7 for 9 from the free throw line, and I think he is one guy where you really would want to be shooting free throws at a high level just because of how much he's around the rim, how much attention he's getting from defenses. If he can initiate that contact, get to the line on a consistent basis, and then make the free throws on a consistent basis, I think is massive. And then you look at Race Thompson, he goes 4 for 4. Trey Galloway goes 2 for 2, and Race Thompson and Trey Galloway, they each had 2 free throws down the stretch. When you're talking about stretch plays, they each had they each had a pair of really important free throws. And then, also you could look at the 3-point line, and Indiana shot 4 for 10, 40%. They've been, I wrote about this not long ago, but basically just how much Indiana has improved from the 3-point line. Which has been a really pressing issue the last few seasons, but they're shooting it well this season. And I made the case. I mean, I think they went 4 for 10 on Saturday. I think they can shoot way more than that. If they're shooting 40%, they can shoot much more than they are. And, obviously you don't want to force them. You want it to be in the flow of the game. But I think if you're looking at ways that Indiana can continue to grow, like, there's still room for Indiana to keep shooting threes. And if Trace Jackson Davis is going to continue to get hounded, keep shooting them. I think Tamar Bates, when he catches it in rhythm, he can be really good. I think shot selection for him is kind of a big thing. I think you might want Miller Kopp to have a little bit more free reign on just letting it fly. But one thing, too, about Trace Jackson Davis that I think impressed me yesterday was the way that he handled the doubles. And if I remember correctly, there were some times where he got doubled, and instead of giving it up or picking up his dribble, he dribbled and waited for the double to leave. So instead of panicking, whatever, making a bad pass, he waits for the double to leave because it just came for a little bit. He has single coverage then, and he takes advantage of it. So I think we've continued to see basically the growth that he has made in dealing with getting a lot of attention, and the fact that he is getting doubled a lot and still putting up the numbers, he has been, while also still making the guys around him better. Like the way that he is playing is just really impressive.
Yeah, that's one area that Matt Painter talked about in the postgame with Trace really growing over the course of his career. Earlier in his career, he probably would have panicked and tried to get rid of the ball a lot more quickly than he did. And you're right, he kind of waited those double teams out. But the other thing that about that situation is just, I think Indiana's shooters are commanding a little bit of respect now on the perimeter too, because if Indiana couldn't make threes at, the level that they are, I know they're not taking a high volume, but they are shooting a really good percentage, then you just basically keep the double team there until you force them to give up the ball or pick the ball up. And, Purdue was obviously sending help, but they abandoned at time too, because they had to respect the perimeter shooting. So I thought overall Trace played just a really smart game. He did have 3 turnovers, 1 assist only, but which is a little bit lower than what we've seen out of him recently in terms of the assists. But overall, I thought a really solid performance. The other thing that was just really a difference in the game was turnovers. Purdue had 16, Indiana had 8. It's something that Indiana struggled with really a lot in Big Ten play is turnovers, and something that Purdue really doesn't turn the ball over that much. And to outscore them, I think it was 20-8 in points off of turnovers was a huge thing. And that kind of goes back to what I mentioned in the first half with, Purdue's guards not really getting comfortable. Zach Edey also had 5 turnovers, which is a lot for him. I guess, how surprised were you that Indiana was able to have that big of an advantage in that department? And what did you see out of them maybe defensively that gave Purdue some problems?
I think Trey Galloway was a big part of that. I think, Jalen Hood-Schifino has 2 fouls in the first half. So Trey Galloway then also on the offensive end has to take a bigger role of the ball handling duties. But when you just look at what Trey Galloway is able to do defensively, the toughness that he brings, the energy, the way that he like runs through screens, gets around screens, and I know that his nickname is Crazy Man, and he does look like a crazy man out there, especially playing on defense. But offensively too, look, his first season at IU, he shoots 18.2% from three. Last season, he goes 21.4% from three. This season, he's shooting right at 50%. He's 20 for 40. In each of those first 2 seasons, he hit three. I think his 3-point growth has been one of the more surprising but encouraging developments this season. And it's not just that, but he seems like he's letting it fly without much hesitation. He's shooting with confidence. I think when you look at just the surprises of like who are some wild cards that when you talk about Indiana shooting better from beyond the arc, like he's a guy that I don't know how many people expected to emerge as like, okay, he's like a really good shooter, because Miller Kopp is shooting well, Tamar Bates is shooting well, Jalen Hood-Schifino is shooting well. And I think Trey Galloway is one where you just add him, another guy that was kind of unexpected. It just opens up the floor so much more for Indiana. And not only that, but it's going to open up the offensive game for him, because he's kind of known more before this season as a slasher, as a creator, a guy that can get to the rim. But now you add that into, 3-point shooting into his game. Now it's going to open up more things for Trace. It's going to open up more things for him. I just think, maybe a little bit unsung of a key to Indiana's season has been Trey Galloway and the growth that he has made.
Yeah, you look at his numbers in Big Ten play. He's shooting 50% for three from three. He's 50% overall for the season, but in Big Ten play, 16 of 32. He's in the top 15 in the league in 2-point field goal percentage. Just really an impressive season, particularly from the perimeter, as you mentioned. He was 18.2% as a freshman from three. Last year, he was 21.4%, so to grow to 50%. And I think the thing that's really impressed me about him is he takes a lot of smart shots. He doesn't really force much. He had a couple runners in the lane yesterday in the first half that were really just taking advantage of Purdue's drop coverage defensively. And then the 3-point shot, he's getting in position where he needs to be. And when he catches the ball, he's now got the confidence to shoot. I don't know what he did in the offseason in terms of his mechanics or if he changed anything. But it's clear that he's put in the work, and it kind of shows that if you do, focus on something in the off season and you're diligent about improving it, you can get better. And he's really been a guy that over the course of his career in Bloomington has gotten better. And he really can't say enough about the defensive work that he did, particularly early in the game yesterday against Lawyer. I thought he made him really uncomfortable and took him out of the game. The individual matchup between Edey and Jackson Davis, a lot of times we go into these games and we talk about, two All-Americans going head to head, and we wonder, will the matchup live up to the hype? Will one guy get in foul trouble? And although Edey did have a little bit of foul issues, he still played, I think, 32 minutes, so he was on the floor quite a bit. Trace plays almost 39 minutes, and I thought for the most part, both of those guys played terrific. I did mention the 5 turnovers for Edey, but I think you got to give a lot of credit for Indiana defensively being able to do that. And the one thing I noticed that those two competing against each other, from my vantage point, they were talking to each other a little bit, but it wasn't a trash talk type of thing. They were smiling and really just kind of enjoying competing against each other. I thought, just in terms of a matchup of two guys going head to head, it really delivered on everything that we thought it could be, and it was really fun to watch those two guys go head to head.
Yeah, and I mean, it was just a good basketball game in general. It was entertaining. Besides maybe Purdue's turnovers, it was a very well played game. It felt like two high level teams playing, and I give credit to the Trace as well, because I think one of the things you need to add in when trying to guard Edie is basically being able to take charges. And because Edie is so big, and that if he lowers his shoulder to be able to do that, and I think Trace did that, and um, Edie's gonna. It feels like it's almost inevitable he's gonna get his at to a certain degree. But I think the way that Indiana was able to slow him down in the first half, was big just in terms of being able to build that lead, which ended up being the difference in the game. But also, it felt like a couple of times Trace was trying to put Edie on a poster. It felt like he was fishing for like a huge dunk, and that would have been insane to see happen. But maybe in Mackey, I don't know. But yeah, anyways, that was impressive that he was at least giving it a shot.
Yeah, less than 3 weeks from now, these teams will be going head to head again. So this last stretch of games, Indiana sets up for the last 4 weeks of the regular season. They play 2 times each week. A lot of high level games coming up, but the one that's kind of coming up here immediately, Tuesday night, another big one in Assembly Hall. Rutgers comes to town, and I believe this is the only Big Ten opponent that Trace Jackson Davis has never beaten in his time in Bloomington. I believe the Scarlet Knights have won 6 in a row against Indiana. They've not been the more talented team always, but they've been the more aggressive team, particularly defensively. And we've heard former Rutgers player Geo Baker kind of make comments on different podcasts just about other teams not being scared of Indiana. And even if, as an IU fan, if you don't like those comments, you don't agree with it. I mean, a lot of what he said is true in terms of Rutgers being able just to kind of take it to Indiana and be the more physical team and kind of impose their will. What do you see, I guess, at this matchup Tuesday? And in terms of how much Indiana has grown from the first matchup, they go to Piscataway, score only 48 points. Obviously, Jalen Hood-Schifino didn't play in that game. They did have Xavier Johnson at that time. But obviously the teams are kind of in 2 different spots. But Rutgers, I believe, is in second place in the Big Ten. It's a big game for them, and also a big game for Indiana, just to kind of prove that they can break through against an opponent that's really had their number now for a number of seasons.
I think this would be a good indication of how Indiana has grown from a toughness standpoint, kind of that intangible, because that was one of the big storylines coming out of that game, is that Rutgers, has and continues to have kind of that junkyard dog mentality. They're just going to out tough you. They might not be the most talented team, but they're going to have more grit. And, so Indiana, obviously in Piscataway, was not the tougher team. And to me, it feels like since then, it hasn't been linear, but Indiana has become a tougher group. They have been a group that's shown more intensity. I mean, you look at the way that Indiana has been able to turn their season around. They lose 3 games in the Big Ten in a row, and then they now have won 6 of their last 7, and are one of the hottest teams in the Big Ten. So I look at it as this is the type of game that, again, I've said it before, but if this Indiana team wants to be different than they've been in past seasons, they have to do different things. And beating Rutgers, something they haven't been able to do, not having let down after a big win, is something that has been, sort of elusive. So, I think this Rutgers game, and I know at this point in the season you say, okay, kind of every game is important, but it feels like this will be another indication, maybe not the final indication, but another indication of where is Indiana's ceiling. Is this team that much different than they were in last season, than they were in 2, 3, 4 seasons ago? This is one where you have to come out with intensity. You have to come out with the same intensity you did against Purdue. You have to come out with that same dog, that same intensity. So to me, that it'll be a good indication of, as much as Indiana wants to, can show itself tangibly, but also just the ability to fight through hurdles, adversity, be able to out tough someone.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And Rutgers, I mean, they deserve a lot of credit. They lost a ton from last year's team, and they're still right there, a game ahead in the loss column of everybody else for second place in the Big Ten. 14th in Ken Palm, the second best defensive team in the country. That's just really impressive. What do you think it is about Rutgers specifically that's given Indiana problems? Is it just their toughness and their defense? Is it something that they do in terms of how they're guarding Trace, making it difficult on him? And what is there a guy or two that you see going into Tuesday that's going to have to play particularly well for Indiana to win? I feel like Jalen Hood-Schifino really has to play well in that game because Paul Mulcahy's an experienced guard. He's going to bring a ton of energy, and Rutgers always gets up for some reason for playing to play Indiana. It seems like they heard all of the noise when they first joined the league that they didn't belong, and people making fun of their program, and they've. It's almost like they know that Indiana is one of the traditional Big Ten programs, and they've wanted to prove themselves year in and year out against Indiana, and they have. And so, to me, I feel like Trace is going to have to play better than he has in the past against Rutgers, obviously, and that's going to be tough to do against Big Cliff. But I also feel like Jalen Hood-Schifino is going to have to play well. You always got to have, I feel like, good guard play to be successful against Rutgers.
I feel like the difference between Rutgers and Indiana in the recent past has been that edge. It just seems like Rutgers has played with an edge, a toughness that Indiana has lacked. Maybe not every single game, but when they go head to head, it feels like that Rutgers has just been a tougher team. And like I go back to thinking in Archie's last season where Indiana had just come off beating Iowa on the road. That felt like, okay, maybe this was a turning point in the season, and then they come back to Assembly Hall, and this was with with a very limited like family and friends type crowd situation, but Geo Baker punks them, Rutgers, and then it felt like that was kind of emblematic of just the inability to sustain any momentum. But I think Caleb McConnell is a really good defender, arguably maybe one of the best in the Big Ten. If they put him on Jalen Hood-Schifino, that's a tough task for him. I think you have to look at you have to look at a Trey Galloway and say, okay, we need you to step up and we need you to have 15 points and blah. Miller Kopp had a great game at Rutgers earlier this season. You need to look at him to maybe make shots. Tamar Bates has been a guy where at various points this season, it's felt like, oh, this is the Tamar Bates breakout. And then he kind of disappears. And I feel like those are the guys that you might need to step up if Jalen Hood-Schifino has a bad game. And that's what happened at Maryland. Jalen Hood-Schifino has a bad game. The other guards didn't do a great job of stepping up. So I feel like if you get in that situation again where, okay, there's still no Xavier Johnson, Jalen Hood-Schifino is struggling, he's being guarded tightly, whatever, that you need your Trey Galloways, Tamar Bates, Caleb Banks, Miller Kopps. Those guys need to, at least one or two of them, a handful of them, someone needs to step up and kind of take on some of that scoring load.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting yesterday post-game with Hood-Schifino. It almost seemed like he was a little annoyed when somebody mentioned the 1 of 14 at Maryland. He almost said like he felt like he didn't play bad. He just didn't make shots. And I think, if you're 1 of 14, to me, that's, however you want to characterize it, not a good game. That's not a performance that's going to lead to many Indiana wins. But I thought to his credit that he bounced back, was really good yesterday. I think 8 of 15 overall from the field, was really good in the mid range. Last thing before we wrap up, just a Big Ten race in general. Looking at these standings, man, this is after Purdue and Rutgers. I mean, you've got a ton of teams at 5 losses. You've got several teams too with 6 losses. I mean, one of these teams, between Michigan State, Penn State, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Michigan, one of these teams is going to be playing Wednesday in the Big Ten tournament. These are quality teams. Just overall, I mean, everybody besides Nebraska and Minnesota in the top 100 at Ken Palm. Nebraska just outside the door, and then obviously Minnesota. You watch a lot of ACC and some other leagues. I mean, just the quality of the Big Ten this season. There may not be that obviously Purdue's been that great number 1 team for most of the season, but the middle is just such a gauntlet. How do you kind of see Indiana fitting into this conference race when it's all said and done, 4 weeks to go? Is this, a team that you feel like is going to have a good chance at securing a double bye? Are they going to be playing Thursday in the Big Ten tournament? And kind of where do you think they need to be record-wise to maybe get in that top 4?
I think that the way the league has been trending this season and the way that Indiana has been trending as of late, like the door is open for Indiana to get near the top. I don't know, it seems like a slim chance that they will catch Purdue because Purdue is kind of up ahead, but the door is open for someone to be good. The door is open for, if you want to start winning games, you're going to get near that. This is not, so after Rutgers 7-5 is, you got a bunch of 7-5 teams. So if you want to start winning games, like there's nothing probably that's going to stop you from getting near the top. So I think if Indiana can, and this is another thing, is that basically, can Indiana continue to sustain? They've won 6 of their last 7, and that's really good. But can they close the season off on a strong foot? Can they continue to sustain that? I said going in to this 4-game stretch, which was Purdue at home, Rutgers at home, Michigan away, and Northwestern away, I said I thought it would be a success if they go 3 of 4. So now they've beaten Purdue, and that was one of the big ones, right? So now you have Rutgers at home. I think you need to go 2 out of 3 of the next 3 to feel good about yourself. I think Rutgers is one you need to have because it's at home. And that would, like we said, kind of be another mark of, okay, this team's showing development. But then I think you need to take 1 or 2 on the road at minimum. I think Northwestern and Michigan they're not going to be easy games to win, but they're both very winnable. So I just think that Indiana needs to continue to string them together. If they can, they'll continue to climb up the Big Ten, because right now it's just kind of a logjam.
You can check out his work at indystar.com. Tyler Tachman, thanks for joining us. What do you I know you're covering the women's team a little bit too, and what kind of is what's going to be your focus here the next couple of weeks? Just doing a little bit of everything?
Yeah, I'm planning to go to the women's game on Thursday, playing Iowa, see Caitlin Clark. That should be exciting. The women's team playing really well. Just that. Men's basketball, some hooping of my own, because I got to get in the lab. But I gotta get how's the IU sports media intramural team? I know William McDermott's also on roster. I know you're on there. What's the early season report? I know you guys have played 1 game so far. Yeah, we're 1 game in. We actually made program history in our first game. We actually tied 50-50. If you didn't think ties were possible in basketball, then you should come to intramural sports at IU. But we finished the game. It was tied. They don't do overtime, so we just left with a draw. And so we're still undefeated. But there's work to do. The team we play on Monday lost by 44 last game. So this is a must win, absolute must win.
We'll be sure to check in for periodic updates. I know there'll be some. I think there's a Twitter account. If you search hard enough on Twitter, you can probably find some updates. I'm still waiting for a live video feed.
We need you down. We need you down here for a coverage. Give the people what they want.
Wasn't the last game like a 10 p.m. tip? I mean, what? It's bad enough.
It's prime time. Yeah, we're playing under the lights.
It's bad enough when we have IU games at 9. We don't need intramural tipping at 10 p.m. But
it's a running clock though. You'll be in bed by 11. Don't worry.
I'm still confused on the tie. That's, to me, it's just that's criminal in basketball. But
yeah.
Anyway, Tyler, thanks for your time this week. Thanks everybody for listening to this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating on Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.